Hey everyone, a quick warning. We are going to be covering a very heavy but necessary subject today with our good friend Ian Cameron from Firearms ZA, who you saw on this channel a few weeks ago. And in this interview, we will be uncovering just how South Africa became the rape capital of the world and why it is becoming worse. So if you are ready for that interview, just keep watching. Hi, Ian. It is great to have you back here on my channel. Unfortunately, on terrible terms once again. It seems with all of the political chaos, COVID, the riots in South Africa, there are even more horrors going on the ground that are being ignored because of this. And this is something I hadn't even heard about until you messaged me the other night, that South Africa is the rape capital of the world, and it is getting even worse. What are the sexual assault rates in South Africa, and just what are the numbers we're looking at here?
I want to sketch a real life scenario as we've experienced recently. Imagine being a mother of a 5-year-old little girl that was raped and murdered, and then she was dumped in a pit toilet with severe injuries on her face, her head, and her little body from how she was beaten by a criminal. And knowing that you, as that mother, has to then go to a police station in South Africa to open a case, to have an investigation done, but you also know that the conviction rate for that specific crime is less than 7%. And to some people, it might sound like I'm telling a story from a movie, but that is the story of little Chantal Mokoena, just 5 years old, from Rocklands in South Africa, that was brutally raped and murdered in 2019. And we have these types of cases every single day. In fact, 116 women are raped every day in South Africa. And the South African government actually ensure that almost 100% of those cases never really see justice prevailing. We have about, if you really go look at statistics, we have about a 12.1 per 100,000 victims per year when we look at violence against women and girls in the world, and a femicide rate that is 5 times that of the global average. That's equal to some war-torn countries. And that means that a woman in South Africa is murdered once every 3 hours. So that means one woman is murdered in South Africa every 3 hours. So as we speak, a woman is most likely being killed in the country. I think that kind of gives you the idea and gives you the context as to how often this happens. And we can obviously still talk then about the reaction from the police.
Yeah, I was about to ask you just what it is in comparison to the rest of the world, because people may hear these numbers, and unfortunately with so many, they're just numbers until you put them beside something else, or until you hear the individual stories. But 5 times worse than is that most countries? How much worse are we talking compared to like the US or Canada? Do you have those numbers?
Well, let me put it in context. If we consider the amount of women murdered every year in South Africa, if you had to go break it up in days, just to give you context, there are just about 2,700 women murdered in South Africa annually. That if people go and consider that and they do the maths, it would clearly show you that the amount of women murdered every day in the country is absolutely horrific. And if you had to compare that to any other country in the world, it's most likely far higher. I mean, it really is a big crisis. I think if we compare the policing side to the countries you mentioned, I think the shock lies in that, because it's one thing to have a crime problem that you are actively working to solve. But it's another case when you have this serious problem and it actually feels like government is complicit in what is happening.
Oh my, yeah. I'm looking at the US stats right now, and it's not even to 1,000 for a year.
Yeah.
And you're talking, 2,700 a year in South Africa. Why is there so little public outcry about this, particularly globally from feminists? That they talk a lot about rape cultures in Canada and America. And while there are certainly issues in Canada and America, our culture generally, legally speaking, within our academic institutions, within our popular culture and media, all opposes rape very loudly every single day. Where are the global voices talking about this? And do you think that we could maybe even call South Africa a real rape culture, when that's what these feminists use to describe countries with far lower rates?
Yeah, I think a lot of people abuse those types of words to get some form of political attention or gain, because I don't see those very people really getting in touch with the victims of these horrific crimes. And without even getting into too much of the political side, I haven't seen the global outcry about this at all. In fact, I think that it really is very limited that we have a general outcry or attention in South Africa, especially from the ruling party. To make it even clearer to you, the current Minister of Police, Minister Bheki, he was the National Commissioner of Police about a decade ago. He was found unfit for duty by a court of law, and now he's the Minister of Police. And it's because of that type of incompetence that we've got people, we've got a convicted rapist now called Nicholas Nino. And just in 2018, he raped a little 7-year-old girl in a restaurant bathroom in the city of Pretoria. And he wasn't convicted because of DNA, and I'll get to the DNA discussion now. He was convicted because he was caught red-handed doing what he did. There were horrific videos doing the rounds where he was filmed, when the parents discovered what was happening, and so on and so forth. But I think if we take it a bit further, we can kind of understand how it's been downplayed by the South African government, because in 2021, in May, the Minister of Police, obviously Bheki, he told us that the South African Police Service had been implementing overtime to clear the DNA backlog of about 208,000 cases. Now, to give you context, Lauren, 208,000 cases. For each case, you've got more or less 4 pieces of critical forensic evidence, let's say plus minus. So that gives you more than 1 million pieces of evidence that need to be processed. Okay. If you take it further, he then said that they want to see how they can have 40% of the human resources dedicated to address this issue. It's now less than 3 months later, and the backlog has just gone over 300,000. And the oversight committee that he himself appointed has only met once in around 12 months. And how on earth do you then get to that, where we've got a country that has got 132 incidents of rape per 100,000 people? I don't know how to make it any clearer that the South African government has done little to nothing, yet they are the first ones to talk about democracy and freedom and respect for women and human rights. But this could be one of the biggest, if not the biggest, human rights violations in South Africa of at least our generation.
The malfunctioning South African Police Service Forensic Science Laboratory has caused a huge backlog of over 300,000 DNA cases. The huge backlog has not been receiving the urgent attention from government that it deserves. This means that victims are not getting their day in court and perpetrators are walking free. The South African Police Service is failing victims of violent crime and GBV in South Africa. This has become a human rights violation.
And there's, many insanely frustrating things about that, but two main ones that I think of are, one, it is extremely difficult to deal with rape cases as is. It's extremely difficult to catch the perps. So they are cases that, especially when you've been given evidence, you need to jump on immediately. You need to look into that, try to find out who this person is, where they are before they flee. I know there are cases that would be happening in the States or Canada where they would just love to have that sort of evidence to be able to go through. That backlog is criminal. And then the second level, many of these rapists and offenders would be repeat offenders. They've probably got DNA kits in there of the same person, they've probably got DNA kits there where they would be able to identify this person because they'd be in the logs. And that is just so infuriating to hear. And all because of government incompetence, these people's lives are being destroyed and they're not getting justice. How are the media holding them to account in South Africa, at least? Is there an outrage about this?
There's more discussion going on about it. I must say a lot of the media have jumped on it in the last few weeks, especially. We haven't seen any real reaction from government. The President Cyril Ramaphosa, in every second speech he makes, he talks about violence against women and children, the gender-based violence issue, the rape problem in South Africa, but we don't see him going into action. We haven't seen him going into action with any real criminal offences in South Africa within his own ruling party. So it's a very worrying response from the government. In fact, if you go and look at the incompetence issue, I've got a list of names. The current president, the previous president, Jacob Zuma, Bheki Cele, the current National Commissioner of Police, Kekla Setoli, Jackie Selebi, Nathi Nhleko, Nathi Mteto, are all national commissioners or ministers of police, and not one of them accurately really took on this issue. And they keep on using it for political gain in speeches and announcements that they make, but we don't see real action on the ground. And to be honest, Lauren, I think one of the main reasons for this is that the ruling party has hijacked law enforcement in South Africa, law enforcement institution, to use and abuse for political gain for the ruling party. It astounds me that, just a week ago, we had a cabinet reshuffle where the president appointed a few new ministers and he still kept this very useless minister of police, Bheki Cele, in his position. And it just does not make any sense to me. And if I speak to victims, they just tell me that it's as though even they are downplayed and they are currently reminded of what happened to them. And it almost feels like it's their fault. When they report it, it almost feels like, they are, kind of infringing on the time of some members in the police because, it's your fault that it happened. And there's just I think it's a moral fiber issue that we have. There's a social fiber problem that it goes deeper than just law enforcement.
I think this really goes into a fascinating conversation of incompetence can be malicious. If your incompetence, like people can fob it off as, it's just incompetence, it's just people not doing their job, being lazy. If your incompetence is leading to people getting assaulted, people being murdered, people being traumatized and justice never being served, that is a malicious level of incompetence. And as you've said, an intentional incompetence where they don't want a shift because this corruption is beneficial to them in one way or another. What are people doing to defend themselves from this?
So there's a huge step forward, especially after the violence a few weeks ago in the KwaZulu-Natal province and Gauteng, of not only women but communities in general saying, but we need to be able to defend ourselves, and how can we do so legally? So we're actually involved in quite a few communities at the moment, assisting them and guiding them as to how they can do it. But especially women, we've seen an increase in women saying, but we want to be able to carry a firearm to defend ourselves. We want to train to use that firearm. We want to be taught how to handle certain situations if we were to be confronted by these horrific criminals. And I think it's a step in the right direction. And I think people would tell me, but no, you need to fix government. And that's true. But I think it's a double strategy. I think on the one side, we want to, keep government accountable and make sure that these stories are told. But on the other side, we need to find a way for people to look after themselves. And I think that's what many people in South Africa are starting to realize, that they cannot account on the police. In urban areas in South Africa, the average police response time is 21 minutes to a crime, and that's if they respond. In rural areas, they very often don't respond at all. And the sad thing about this is that we really do still have thousands and thousands of fantastic men and women that wear the blue uniform. But unfortunately, the incompetence on management level and especially national level is so high that they just don't get the support on ground level that they need. And therefore, many communities, and in this case, the female community, if you could call it that in South Africa, is to a very large extent on their own. And we cannot depend on government to ensure that justice prevails, because thus far, they have completely failed. 1.2 million pieces of evidence that you are behind in your forensic process. It's flabbergasting. It's absolutely shocking. In fact, as I said earlier, it could be the biggest human rights violation of our time, because it seems that them not doing something makes them complicit.
No, absolutely. The one good thing that I heard there, though, is absolutely women beginning to arm themselves. One thing I observed while filming Farmlands was so many of these farm wives they're like, when my husband's home, I know I've at least got someone to take care of me if something happens. But literally every time my husband goes out into the field, every time he drives to the shops, I am terrified of being in my home alone. And empowering these women with the ability to defend themselves is the way to combat that 100%. What are the updates on the riots in South Africa since we last talked? You said they've settled down a bit, but there's also potentially plans for more coming up, from what I understand.
Yeah, so at the moment it's quiet. There was a lot of sugarcoating from the government, especially on a national level and provincial level in the KwaZulu-Natal province, where they were trying to point fingers at communities for not doing what they were meant to do, and etc. etc. The point is, all fingers point back at government that weren't prepared. That their internal fights caused this whole uprising that happened. And obviously the whole looting issue. Nevertheless, there are rumors of things happening later in August, and that we can expect violence from then again. The South African National Defence Force have been deployed in some parts to protect national key points. And the president has centralized the whole security cluster under the presidency, which in my opinion is worrying. It's a typical socialist type of movement. And I think the previous president did it as well. He just didn't do it on paper. Nevertheless, I think we can expect more issues in the near future, and we need to prepare ourselves for that. I don't think South Africa, unless there's some magical change happening in terms of government, can really say that things are going to calm down and be peaceful in the next few years. At least I think we're reaching a boiling point of frustration in the country.
Well, at least there's a lull in the chaos to gather your thoughts and to gather and organize your communities. Absolutely. Ian, thank you so much for coming on to talk to me about this issue. Is there anything else you would like to add, or any websites people can check out to investigate this, what you've called, and I think accurately, one of the biggest human rights violations of our time, as well as your personal information and updates you give on South Africa?
I would encourage people to please visit actionsociety.co.za. Action Society is at the forefront of this whole battle regarding the DNA backlog and gender-based violence in South Africa. If people want to see more updates of unrest and those types of challenges in South Africa, they're more than welcome to check out Ian Cameron 23 on Twitter. And then also visit firearms.co.za. We post a lot of stuff there about community safety, how people can defend themselves in South Africa within the framework of the law. So I think those are the 3 platforms that I would encourage people to check out.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ian. And to my audience, particularly my South African friends out there, we are praying for you. Keep your eyes peeled for late August in case there's a bit of uproar, which Ian has warned. There's talk of that. And men, women, doesn't matter your gender. Be ready to protect yourself and defend yourself. There are legal options out there. Ian talks a lot about it. Unfortunately, you are in a crazy situation, and I've always got my audience here that are praying for you and spreading the word about what is happening. We will have Ian back very soon to give us some more updates, and we will chat next time.